Hello, welcome to WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle, our weekly talk show about all things USC football. We have the usual crew here today. I'll introduce them anyway, just in case it's the first time you've ever watched it. We have Mark Culkin. Mark Culkin is one of our most prolific writers, I think you could say. Can't you say that, Mark?
That's a one way of saying he's not a really good writer, but he writes a
No,
lot.
that's not true. People say Shakespeare's prolific, and they don't mean that he was bad. I'm also not saying you're Shakespeare. That's silly. Mark writes a number of articles on a weekly basis for WeAreSC. You can find them on the premium message board and on the website. He also does regular basketball and football practice reports. Has his own podcast. The name of the podcast, Mark?
Locked on USC.
Locked on USC. Check it out. He's Mark Culkin. We have Eric McKinney. Eric is the editor-in-chief of WeAreSC. He's the boss. He's the one that can fire us any minute. So if I say things on this program you don't like, it's his fault that I continue to come back week after week. Eric is a recruiting guru. He also, as you might guess, does writes a lot of the content on the site. Graduate of SC. Fantastic guy, Eric McKinney. And we're happy to have him. Eric, welcome to your own show.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it.
We're going to do the usual. We're going to dive right into to what's important, which right now I think is spring ball. So since we talked to you last, another week of spring ball down, and a number of interviews at least. I mean, that may be where we get most of our information, from interviews and then from watching guys walk in and watching guys walk out, and then the spying devices that Mark Culkin uses. So fellas, what did we learn this second week of spring ball? Let's start with you, Mark.
So I'm not sure we've learned a whole lot more than we learned from first week. They've had, I guess, 2 Saturday scrimmage-like type of events, which we've seen them when USC releases their hype videos, their highlights from these from their weekends. It's pretty physical, and this last one, it looked like it got really physical. They showed some I don't know, would you call that a modified Oklahoma drill, where those guys are laying on their stomach and then jumping up and going after the ball carrier? Really interesting, and they're getting after it. So that's a good thing for anybody who thinks, well, USC doesn't have physical practices. I like that we're getting to find out who these transfer players are. We got to talk to them last week for the first time. Some of them are a little bit more guarded than others. Others are more gregarious. But I think their personalities fit the program really well. Lincoln Riley divulged, and I'm sure Eric will go into this a little bit more at length because he talked about it on the message board, was the most talented tight end room he's had. Lincoln Riley said he's had since he's been here. Hopefully he uses them, because last year he had some good ones. And I understand that, everyone's still kind of trying to get comfortable with the personnel and yada, yada, yada. But I think if Lincoln Riley goes back to using all 3 phases of his offense, the running back, the tight end, as well as those 4 really good young wide receivers, offensively, USC is not going to have a problem transitioning into the Big Ten Conference, even with Miller Moss starting his second game of his career, should he be named the starter. So right now, we don't know a whole lot. We know that competition is open. We know that Dennis Lynch has a competition going at kicker, and that the tight ends are going to be hopefully going to be used some more. So other than that, I'm waiting to see what I can see in practice. We get to watch them walking out. They look much bigger, and we'll see from there. That's it.
I guess one thing that we haven't heard about is any serious injuries, and we haven't seen guys that you would expect to be on the field hobbled. So, I mean, I don't want to speak that into existence. I'm just pointing out that that's pretty good news after a couple weeks of spring practice.
I have yet to see anybody on crutches. The handful of yellow jerseys are usually the quarterbacks. There's been a few of them out there other than the quarterbacks. But until Lincoln Riley says we've got a significant injury, there haven't been any significant injuries. So we'll take it with a grain of salt that everybody is okay.
All right, McKinney, give us your wisdom here. What have we learned from this second week of spring ball?
I think we may have gotten the quote that is the most important thing that we hear maybe all spring. and that came from Josh Henson, the offensive line coach, and that's him talking about the defensive line and really kind of the first glimpse at what's going to be different between Alex Grinch's defense and D'Anton Lynn's defense. We certainly assumed there's going to be something, and probably a lot of somethings based on how UCLA played defensively last year and how USC played defensively last year.
Please let there be a lot of somethings, please.
The key though for me that jumps out, and I'll go with the whole Josh Henson quote. And again, this is him asked about kind of what have you seen from the defensive line, and he's a guy, obviously he's gonna be watching his offensive line, but when he goes through film and watches what's happening, he's seeing plenty of the defensive line. He said they're trying to play through you instead of around you. That forces us to do the little things right, like our hands inside, our elbows in, makes us better players. When it just comes down to two guys lining up in front of each other and one guy moving the other one off his spot, we're getting a lot of guys playing through us, and that to me is going to help make us better overall. So that's the quote from him. That's what jumped out to me in these first couple weeks here, and I think that is big for both sides of the ball. You had a defensive line the last couple years that was, very clearly when Alex Grinch got brought in, that was the first thing that we all talked about. Okay, this is a one gap defensive front. The idea is you're going to move quicker than the offensive lineman. You're going to slice through gaps. Hopefully the offense calls a play where that gap's open and you can get through and make a play. The idea was, right, you're getting past them. You're putting the offensive line kind of on its heels. They're playing with you sort of behind them on the other side of the line. What happened a whole lot was USC's defensive line wasn't really big enough to even matter if they started going up, because once they started jumping into a gap, they just got run to the sideline and out of every single play. So if the defensive line for USC is now bigger and able to physically move offensive linemen around and make it challenging for them to actually get into their play and get to where they need to go, that to me is a big win for the USC defensive line, for the defense, for everybody involved. And that's what I took from this first couple of weeks. And again, I don't know if we're going to get a quote from any coach the rest of spring that gives you kind of more confidence in, all right, there's a change defensively that you can actually kind of believe in, and that should produce tangible results. You can hear, yeah, we're hitting, guys are making plays, guys doing whatever, but that fundamental change of no, I've seen how our offensive line has practiced against our defensive line for a couple years, and it's different now, and the difference is going to make both sides better. That's all you wanted. That's really all you wanted from the defensive side.
Was that a more interesting quote than his other one, though, about, the right side tackle?
You're gonna get yes, the talk about, are they gonna add through the transfer portal? Do they still have to do stuff to the offensive line? That's fine. That's all stuff to get figured out. For me, the actual DNA of your program, how are you going to play on the defensive line? And I'm not even talking about just individual people. I just mean, what are you going to ask that group to do? That to me is bigger in terms of finding success and how you're going to play this year. The people that you need and all of that, the transfer portal lets you figure that out. You could bring in 25 more guys and kind of shuffle everything and however you want to do that in terms of personnel. But how you're playing kind of from the ground up in the trenches, to me is the bigger story that USC can get figured out this spring.
Yeah, that quote also jumped out at me, and I actually took it almost as a veiled shot at the old defensive staff, and maybe Henson didn't intend it that way. But I say that because running around blocks is almost always something you say as a criticism to defensive players, right? And if you haven't played football or haven't played much football, understand that when you're trying to run around guys instead of taking them on, it makes it much easier for them to push you whatever direction you're going. And it also makes it virtually impossible for you to stand your ground and just create a mess in front of the ball carrier, right? And so Eric mentioned it, but this is something we've seen for both years of Alex Grinch's defense, is you have defensive linemen slanting, but not taking on offensive linemen aggressively, and then just getting pushed 3, 4, 5, 6 yards down the line of scrimmage. And it creates these gaping run holes. Sometimes those gaping run holes were caused by the fact that guys were lined up wrong, but sometimes it was caused by this slanting. And you can imagine if you have a defensive end or any sort of edge player, and he's being kicked out, and the guy inside of him is slanting and being pushed 3, 4, 5 yards inside, it's going to leave a giant 5, 6, 7 yard hole, which we saw all the time with that defense, right? And when you have that, we complain about, linebackers missing tackles. Well, here's the thing though. If you have a linebacker one-on-one with a guy and you have 6, 7 yards of space for him to put a move on, that running back is likely going to be a better athlete than the linebacker. Linebackers are going to have a hard time making that tackle. And if they make it, 2 out of 3 times or 2 out of 4 times, the other times it's a huge play. So I also saw that as a huge statement about what USC is trying to do. And frankly, not because Lynn's defense is trying to do something unusual, but because his defense is trying to do what defenses really should always be trying to do. It just doesn't make any sense to run around blocks. And I can't tell you that Alex Grinch was telling his guys to run around blocks, but I can tell you that my impression, and apparently Josh Henson's impression, was that that's exactly what they were trying to do, which is a mistake. Couple other things came up. There were questions again about Eric Gentry's weight. Now, look, Gentry's weight gets talked about more than any other man in America, right? I mean, usually all this talk in the media about weight, usually about a female pop star or female actress. Very seldom is anybody this interested in how much a man weighs. But the coaches were asked about it, and I think essentially what Lincoln Riley said is that he has put on weight, but he hasn't put on as much as we wanted him to put on. And this is something we're going to continue watching. What do we make of Lincoln Riley's quote about Gentry being a little too light still?
I think they're in a situation where, they can shove food down his throat, make him lift more, but, genetically, he just might not be able to get to a certain weight class that they want him at. They said he's doing what they're asking. It's just he's got, I guess, a really high metabolism rate. USC's had players like this in the past. Remember Mike Morgan? Similar type of player. They tried to put weight on him. Eventually, he played on the outside. Eric Gentry for USC has been playing on the inside. I don't know what they're going to do with him. I think that's the problem, is they want to play him in certain places, but his size might limit what he's capable of doing.
Yeah, what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think Lincoln's he's gonna push everybody. Nothing's gonna be good enough, is what I think in terms of how he's gonna talk about this team for a while. I don't think he's gonna settle sort of for anything. So I understand, right? It's the same kind of way he's talking about Miller Moss. Miller Moss, I think all the expectation from players and fans and certainly me is that he's going to be the starter, but I don't get the sense that Lincoln Riley is going to come out and say, "Oh yeah, he's a starter. That's settled." Like, he's going to push everything, and that's what I think part of this is still kind of lighting that fire under him, because Eric Gentry gets asked about his weight. He does not like to talk about it. I mean, it comes up a lot, and you can understand the frustration, because when he's on the field, he makes plays. Like, he is one of the guys where if you put him out there for 10 plays, I don't know if there's another guy defensively that I would feel as good about, where if he's on the field for 10 plays, he's going to come up with something big on one of those, and he's going to be pretty much where you need him to be on all the other ones. So I have a lot of faith that this staff, whatever he ends up weighing, and I know Lincoln Riley said he's put on weight, he's one of the guys where just visually looking at him coming out, it looks like last year, right? There's some guys that are just noticeably bigger. Braylon Shelby last year looked impressive. This year looks like a different guy. It's incredible him. So He's not a guy that jumps out like that, but I have a lot more faith in this defensive staff that they're going to be able to say, okay, this is who he is. This is what he can give us. We can find ways to utilize him. But I think ultimately, yeah, Lincoln Riley is going to keep not taking shots, but keep trying to light fires under everyone, especially on that defensive side. That no, we're not done yet. We're not where we need to be. We got to keep pushing as we go towards the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with Gentry is that he is a playmaker, and he has been when he's been able to be on the field, he's been one of USC's most consistent defenders both the last 2 years. You don't want a guy like that to be a situational player, right? You don't want him to be a 3rd and 12 guy. You want him to be somebody who can play on 1st and 2nd down. You want to be able to have him on the field on 3rd and 1 because he's a playmaker. But I do think there's some question about his ability to do that at, say, 215, right? Especially if you're going into a conference where it's not primarily a speed conference. I mean, there are obviously some guys that can run in the Big Ten, but it's primarily a conference where you have big guys and you like to run the football. And so I would like to see him put on weight. He's going to be playing regardless. I think the question is he going to be a guy who's going to play 70 plays a game or a guy who plays 35, 40 plays a game? And his weight's probably going to determine that, as is whether or not his frame can hold up enough to stay on the field. And I don't think anybody knows that, but historically he's had a little bit of difficulty with that. And I don't know if that's caused by weight. Big guys get hurt too, but it might be. What about this competition at kicker? It's interesting. I think that if USC's place kicking was not disastrous last year, but it also wasn't great, right? I mean, there were some major kicks that were less than 40 yards that you need to make that USC didn't make. But they weren't terrible at the bad spot. And so I don't know what to make of kicking competitions because we don't get to see them. And I don't know to what extent, like, here's the thing, if it's Lincoln Riley and a quarterback, Riley's not going to just be making his decision based on what a completion percentage was in practice, right? Because there's a lot that an expert is going to see that's below the surface. I don't know who the expert is who's looking at things below the surface with the kickers. It may be Lincoln Riley, but probably isn't. He probably doesn't know kicking much better than we do. What do we make of this? What do you think is going to happen at the kicking spot? Are we going to have the best dressed man in America still at that position, or are we seeing a change on the way?
I think there's a change on the way. To answer your question, by the way, his name is Ryan Doherty. He's our special teams analyst consultant, I guess you would call him. So, look, you talked about it, Chris. Field goal kicking isn't really an issue. They were 3 for 3 from 50 yards beyond, right? It's the chippies that Dennis Lynch has had a problem with. The biggest problem I have with the kicking game is the kickoffs themselves. Just find a guy who can put the ball in the back of the end zone, period. End of story. Not a guy who's going to do it occasionally, and then in between occasionally, you're kicking it out of bounds. You can't have that. I think the guy who's going to end up taking the job is going to be here in the summer. He's a walk-on. Ryan, how do you pronounce it? Sari? Really strong leg. So I think that's where the kickoff specialist will come from. We'll see what happens as far as extra points and field goals. But I think they finally have a guy coming in who can put the ball back into the peristyle kickoffs.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice weapon. I mean, look, we saw last year a lot of teams decided not to kick it in the end zone against USC because they knew USC wasn't going to block anybody. But if your coverage unit isn't going down and hitting people at the 15-yard line, you're much better off kicking it in the end zone, which has been a challenge. Okay, we've also had another recruiting weekend down. Again, not official visits, but certainly some unofficial visits, a lot of high school coaches, another commitment this week, and it appears a commitment that could happen any day. So let's talk about last week's recruiting weekend and the one commitment that came out of it. Eric, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, USC coaches are doing a good job this spring in getting a ton of guys on campus for unofficial visits and generating a lot of recruiting momentum and like a need to get into the class. If you look at the 2025 class, there's not a ton of commitments for USC. There's 6 right now, and Notre Dame's got like 18 or something. Like some of these schools have run off and built these classes really early. But USC has done a good job of getting kind of getting sort of a push from guys to jump into this class right now. And so I think it's a ton of positives right now. You're gonna get those June weekends now. So like you don't want to fill up right now because those June weekends where you assume the luau or the whatever they're gonna do. They've already used the crawfish boil. I don't know if you can go back to the well on that, although it worked so well. Maybe you can. But I think that month is gonna be huge. The commitment comes from a 3-star running back. I think 3-star, 4-star, whatever you want to call him, whatever he's going to get to, Riley Wormley from Texas. And to me, all you need to know, Anthony Jones Jr., when he comes over from TCU, that's the first guy who says, hey, I want to go offer this guy. And they get a commitment from him. If you trust a coach, right? If you trust a coach to come in and run that position group and be the guy there, you've got to trust who he says, no, this is my guy. This is who I want to go get. And so for me, that sort of speaks volumes that he was able to do that and bring him in. I don't think USC is done at that running back spot. I think there's a few guys and Carson Cox from California probably at the top of the list in terms of targets still there. But that to me is one of those things where you look at the recruiting ranking. I think he's low 300s or something, 400s. But again, Anthony Jones Jr. has done enough in terms of producing talented running backs at every stop he's been where, yeah, I'll sign off on the guy that he wants at that spot.
Yeah, it's an interesting pickup in some respects because Wormley is not a particularly big kid. Maybe 180 pounds, and can probably get up to 200 or so, I would guess, over the course of a few years, but not a particularly big guy. I don't know that he's a burner. I think he runs pretty well. His track times are okay, but nothing more than that. But there are a couple things that I guess point in the direction of this being a big pickup. One is USC's not desperate at this point to find running backs. So if you go out and chase after this guy and take a commitment from him right now, it's because you really want him. And you can say the coaches got it wrong, and I guess time will tell, but this is a guy they really wanted. The other thing is this is a guy who is playing against elite competition week after week and is productive. I mean, he missed the first half of the season last year, still had, I think, around 1,000 yards and over 10 yards a carry. He plays for South Lake Carroll, which is one of the elite programs in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and they play all the other elite programs. So you're talking about really good high school football that kid's playing against, and he's really productive at that level. So yeah, they have that. The first time in a while we've had an offensive commitment, which is interesting at Lincoln Riley's USC. But and it looks like there's another one in the works. I'm going to go ahead and since everybody's making their prediction, this guy's going to commit. I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction, even though I'm not a recruiting guru. And Matai Tagaoai, I hope I said that right. We don't know, safety, outside linebacker. I don't think anybody knows yet what he's going to be. He's certainly a playmaker. Looks like he might be on the verge of making a commitment to SC. Mark, what do we know about Matai? Both in terms of where his recruitment stands and what kind of player he is.
Well, he came on campus. He's been here a few times now, and I think he's gotten over the label, or at least USC's gotten over the label being too bougie for him. But
tell people what you mean by that, because we undoubtedly have viewers that don't know.
Yeah. So look, a lot of times these young men, they go to their 7-on-7 events, whatever, camps, whatever. And there's guys that are hanging around and they might hear something from somebody who said, this player said that. Allegedly, Matthias didn't think USC was the place to be. It was the program at the time was too bougie. Apparently that's not the case because he's been at USC a few times. He's been hanging out. And as you said, it sounds like he's getting ready to pull the trigger. He's going to commit. But, you look at him and he's not a big guy. He's another linebacker frame that you would say, all right, well, he's not as tall as Eric Gentry, but he weighs about as much as Eric Gentry. And, where is he going to play at USC?
I'm not sure he weighs as much as Eric Gentry does at this point, right? I mean,
Exactly.
you'll probably get there, but no, not yet.
Here's the thing. You got every top blue blood program in the country wants this young man. So they know something that you and I and whomever's been watching him play don't know. This guy projects out really well, whether it's his athleticism, his football IQ, whatever it is, everybody wants him. And it sounds like USC's about to get him. So that's a really good thing. And, going back to what Eric said earlier in the show about, the defense is playing, through guys now and not around guys. Maybe that's what people were talking about. USC was too bougie on the defense. Now they're becoming a more physical team. And I think that's resonating, with recruits like Matai, who, everybody in the country wants.
Man, I'd take that adjective. Bougie is probably the nicest adjective I could imagine to describe USC's defense the last 2 years. McKinney, what do you think about Matai?
Yeah, I mean, look, if he's gonna play kind of like that rover position where Kyle Hamilton has played a little bit with the Ravens, which Dantlin, that's going to be the defense that always gets connected to him is his time there with Baltimore. So if he's playing more of that, it's not as if USC would be looking to bring him in as the only inside linebacker and say, hey, you got to play inside linebacker right now as a freshman. I mean, this could end up being a phenomenal class of inside linebackers that lets you kind of move him to wherever it fits best, right? I mean, just in state, Noah McHale is a big, solid, thick, like prototypical inside linebacker. Man Faremo is the exact same thing from San Diego, 6'3", 225. He's listed at, and then another top guy is Riley Pettyjohn, 6'3", and again, 200 plus pounds. Like USC could absolutely load up on those typical inside linebacker thumper kind of guys. And then, oh, by the way, you've got this guy who's just an unbelievable athlete. I think he's like top 150 recruit by all the services. And it's like, we don't have to fit him into this specific spot. We can look at him kind of everywhere because we're filled in now with those kind of traditional inside linebacker guys in this class. So, I mean, again, you could be looking at this as, yeah, he's listed as a linebacker, but more defensive athlete. And again, those are guys where in Dantlin's scheme, he's going to find ways to utilize those guys. And you want as many of those as possible, as long as, right? Like he said this too, and this was another thing that sort of stuck out to me in the first 2 weeks, I think on a Trojans Live thing, where he said, you want guys who fit the body type, right? You want guys who are this tall, this heavy when you're looking at what position you want them to play. He also said, look, there's guys who just sometimes have it, right? They've got a motor. Yeah, they're too small, but they can still play. Yeah, they're too thin, but they can still play. He said, you don't want to overload on those guys. But every once in a while, yeah, you need those guys and you need to roll the dice a little bit on, yeah, we're going to find a spot for this guy. We're going to bring him in because we think he can play. And, everybody wants, I think the Eric Gentry thing has USC fans a little shell-shocked with what an inside linebacker has to look like and what they need to do coming in at a high school. People forget how much those guys can develop and that you're still maybe 3 years away from any of these guys really needing to contribute.
Yeah, but is it his size and weight that has USC fans confused, or is it the position designation? Just say he's a linebacker. Take the I off the LB and
look, here's the thing. I've watched the tape on the kid a little bit, not a ton. I've watched some highlights. he is an athlete. He has suddenness. He can make plays. And I don't know if he's going to grow into a traditional inside linebacker or not. I don't know if that's where he's going to play. I'm not sure that I care. Here's what I know. I watch his tape and I see a guy who is athletic and sudden and makes plays. And I look at his offer list and I see Texas, OU, Notre Dame, Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, Penn State, Miami, Texas A&M, Utah, Washington, Michigan, all on that offer sheet. If you're telling me that USC's defensive staff doesn't know what to look for, then I'm going to look at you skeptically. If you tell me the USC's defensive staff doesn't know what to look for, and neither do all of those other guys, I'm just going to tell you, you probably need to relax a little bit and just let this thing play out. This is a kid who looks like a player, and from my perspective, even if he's sort of a tweener. I mean, Matt Grudegood was a tweener. I'm not saying this kid's Matt Grudegood, but Matt Grudegood was a tweener. Mike Patterson was too small. I mean, sometimes there are guys that can just play, and everybody in the country seems to think this kid can play. And if the worst you get out of him is a third down linebacker and a guy who's going to be a terror on special teams for 4 years, that's a take. I'll tell you this. If USC didn't land this guy, if he committed to Georgia, USC fans would be out of their mind angry that we have a top 100 recruit in Orange County that's going to Georgia or Alabama, right? So I hope he does commit. I'm actually excited about him. I think he looks like he's a promising guy, and if nothing else, I don't want him to go to Oregon. That'd make me sick. Okay, let's talk about something unusual for the huddle. I don't know that we've ever talked about this. Let's talk a little bit USC basketball, and let's start with women's basketball, because if you're talking about USC basketball, that's a squad that's the most fun to talk about. So we had all kinds of news this week. USC's women's team is in the Elite Eight. By the time you people watch this show, they're either going to be dismissed from the tournament or they're going to be in the Final Four. We're going to make predictions, and when you watch the show, you'll know whether any of us know what we're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about USC women's basketball. And we had the news that Andy Enfield is headed to Dallas. I guess it's a swap for all the running backs we pull out of Texas. We get running backs, they get Andy Enfield. Let's start with the women's team. Mark, you follow this stuff pretty closely. You're one of the few people in the world that pays attention to USC basketball on an everyday basis. So tell us what we should think about the women's team's success, and then give me your prediction, because we need to know.
So, yes, I do follow the men's basketball program very closely. I'm on a, I guess I would say, a first name basis on knowing about the women's team. That's about as close as I've gotten to them. Look, the women's team is doing exactly what everybody wanted from the men's team this year, and that's to go really far in the tournament. And they're doing that on the backs of a really good player, and she's a freshman. Her name is Juju Watkins. Look, I have not watched a whole lot, but what I have watched, she's the real deal. I mean, she can score, she can distribute the ball, but she also plays defense. I mean, she literally does it all on the court. And I for that, I tip my hat. The reason why I don't spend a lot of time watching women's basketball, and again, I respect it.
Careful. I don't know what you're going to say. Just be careful.
I'm going to be very careful. I respect the game. I think the way they play it is technically perfect. If you like watching Pete Carrill, Princeton type of basketball, get out there and watch the women play, because they're going to show you how to play it technically the right way. But there's also some athleticism out there. With that said, I think the original question that I was going to answer was, where does Juju rank in?
We're gonna get to that later. Get to that later. Let's just do this. Give us your prediction. Are they going to the Final Four, or are they getting bounced tonight?
They are, man, they're going up against a UConn team that is, UConn plays basketball. If you don't, that is their sport. I'm going to say that USC's run is going to continue into the Final Four, but that's where it's going to end. They will beat UConn.
All right, Eric McKinney. I know you're an expert on this subject, so tell us what is it we need to know about this story, and are the women winning tonight and headed to the Final Four?
When they initially got UConn, My first thought was, okay, that's kind of where it's gonna end. But you dig into this, and look, Paige Beckers is unbelievable for UConn, and I think today, right? We're recording this Monday before the game. Today, you may have between Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, Juju Watkins, and Paige Beckers, four of the eight, certainly four of the 10, like most notable college athletes in the country right now. And that's a, I know that that's a big statement, but I think with men's basketball being what it is right now, with guys leaving and not a whole lot of big time like spotlight guys, and then with Caleb Williams out of college football and those quarterbacks, you're kind of waiting to see who's the next guy there. Maybe Shadur Sanders or guys like that, just in terms of kind of the national consciousness. So this is a huge night for college sports for women's basketball. So Mark's right? UConn, you go look back at what they've done. It's like Sweet 16, championship game, Final Four, Final Four, Final Four, Final Four. Like you go back the years, and there's not a lot of seasons where they're not one of the last 4, 8, certainly 16 teams standing. But this team does not have a ton of depth. And USC, it's not like they go 10, 11 deep, but they've got 7 or 8 that they can run at you. UConn just played 6 against Duke. And so whatever wear and tear is on USC is certainly on UConn. I think they can get UConn. Mark's right. It's a different story when you look at the Iowa LSU if they'd get them next. But I do think, again, my first blush, UConn's going to beat USC. The more you look at it, I think that USC has a real shot. There's people other than Juju Watkins that are really contributing, and I think Lindsey Gottlieb has found something with this roster and this program this year.
It's a battle-tested team, right? I mean, the Pac-12 has a lot of good women's basketball teams with Stanford and UCLA, and they've, and others. I mean, there are a number of ranked teams. They played some good teams. I'm with you. I'm not an expert on women's basketball. It's amazing to me that I can recognize as many women's basketball player names this year as I can. But I found myself actually going to my phone and checking scores at night when the women are playing. I haven't done that ever. And so I'm gonna lob in my completely uneducated opinion. Also, I think the Trojans are going to be in the Final Four, and that's going to be a pretty special deal for that program. Okay, let's talk about the other program. Andy Enfield, he's gone. My impression is that Andy Enfield had his strengths, good recruiter. USC certainly had worse coaches than Andy Enfield in the basketball program, but I don't see a lot of tears being shed for his departure either. What are we to make of Andy Enfield leaving and going to Dallas?
It was time. Look, you said it, Chris. He's lifted the program up to one of its best places it's been in its program's history. So you tip your hat to him. He recruited great. But I don't know if he is the right coach for USC in today's transfer portal NIL era. I don't know if anybody can really put their finger on what happened with the men's program this year, but I've been talking to a few people, and it wasn't that the locker room was divided, but there was just too many individuals and not enough team. And whether that had to do with the NIL situation, I know there's some people who paid into the NIL saying, you know what, I don't know if I'm going to do that again, because they didn't get a return on their investment. SMU, they played it smart. They waited till the buyout dropped to $2 million this week. Last week, I think it was 2.5 times that. So it is what it is right now. We're going to find out if Jen Cohen knows how to identify a basketball coach, because her last hire at Washington, and I'm not knocking her, but the last person she hired at Washington for the men's basketball program was Mike Hopkins. He is now looking for a job. So we'll see. There's a lot of good coaches out there. I would like, well, we're talking about on the message board. I would hope that they go see what kind of interest they have with Bryce Drew at Grand Canyon University. That's a guy who is at a college where, you know what, all he deals with is transfer players. And every year he cobbles them together, and they're competitive. Not just competitive, You saw what they did in the tournament this year. They got to the round of 32, and they were really close to knocking off Alabama, who just knocked off North Carolina. Bryce Drew knows how to coach basketball. And when you can just take a mishmash of talent, regardless of where it comes from, and bring them together on a year-to-year basis, that's probably a good person to look at.
Eric, is there a right basketball coach for USC, or is this just a program that maybe for lack of fan support, maybe because of maybe USC basketball is the same problem that UCLA football has, which is they just happen to be in the town with the wrong program, that it just doesn't work. I mean, my impression, you would think that USC could make basketball work, but there's really no evidence of that historically. Does anybody even care? Has everybody stopped watching our program because we're talking about basketball? Do I need to stop this discussion right now and move on to football?
I think yes. I think yes to all of those, right? I mean, look, I love when USC basketball is good. It's fun to watch. I don't have the passion for it as when, right? It's a nice thing. Oh, that's great. They're here, they're whatever. Honestly, I would have been fine. And I know I don't speak for a lot of USC fans and certainly basketball fans. Andy Enfield, if he had just ridden it out and coached here for 20 more years, fine. That's fine. Every few years, they would have run to the Elite Eight or Sweet 16. He wasn't going to embarrass USC. I mean, he took over a program that was, just horrific. And then his first 2 years, it took him a little bit. And then all of a sudden, he's in the tournament third year. And then it was like, you had the one down year this year, and it was disappointing when they weren't up there, top 3 in the Pac-12 every year. That's not the expectation for USC. Oh, they got to win the Pac-12 this year. They got to win the Pac. So I think there is probably a guy who can get it together, a coach who can get it together and have some good seasons. But I don't think there's a slam dunk. And I think USC fans are going to keep saying, we want a winner, we want a winner. And then they're going to play in front of 3,500 fans at Galen Center every night. It's proven year over year that it is really tough to pack that stadium, that auditorium. And the toughest thing is that Enfield's best year and his best player came when fans couldn't be there, couldn't watch it. I mean, what that team, I think, could have done in terms of bringing fans out and that fan support, I think, would have been pretty significant with Evan Mobley there, kind of leading the way. So I trust Jen Cohen to go out and find a good coach. I don't think this is going to be something where it's like, oh yeah, you get the coach in and all of a sudden they're winning the Pac-12 every single season and players all of a sudden really want to go to USC and it's a power program. I've seen enough of USC basketball over years and years where as soon as you start to buy in, they find a way to sort of let you down a little bit, whether it's in the tournament or recruiting or whatever it comes up with.
All right. Well, I'm convinced we're moving on, and we're going to move on because the truth is that USC fans, there are USC fans that care about basketball. Of course there are. But USC fans are emotionally invested in football in a way they're not in basketball. So let's get everybody riled up again. Now, USC fans, West Coast fans, maybe all fans like to complain about ESPN, which of course has such a hold on college football and is not exactly an impartial power broker, right? Because they're both the media and they're a major participant. And so sometimes you question whether what they're writing is based on what they really believe or because it's what they want to, what they need to say in order to get ratings and to promote the people they have an interest in. That's all lead up to, in the off season, occasionally they put out articles based on what they call their way too early top 25. They had one come out in the last day or two, the defining matchups for all top 25 teams. I looked at the top 25 they had, and it made me angry. It shouldn't make me angry. It's stupid that it does because it's just, as they admit, a way too early ranking in the off season by some ESPN knuckleheads. That being said, let's talk about this. They have Oregon at number 3. I know Oregon got a transfer quarterback to replace the Heisman finalists that they just lost, but Oregon was not a top 3 team last year. Oregon hasn't been a top 3 team in a while, from my perspective. And the quarterback they got is a guy who left the program he was at because he was going to get beaten out by a true sophomore. That's the reality. That's why that kid left OU to go to Oregon. It wasn't for any other reason. He was going to get beat out by the kid from Denton Guyer. Okay, so you have Oregon number 3, Notre Dame number 5. Notre Dame also lost their quarterback. Notre Dame wasn't a top 5 team last year. Ole Miss number 6. I guess that means they're one of the top 6 teams in the SEC. You'd expect that. But Missouri, number 7. I know they had a good year last year, but geez. Arizona, number 11, after losing their coach. Michigan, number 13, after losing their coach and everybody. They lost everybody off the roster except for 2 defensive linemen. They're number 13. You've got NC State at 18. Louisville, 21. Kansas at 22, Kentucky at 23, and Texas A&M, the biggest underachiever in college football year after year after year after year, coming off a 6-loss season. They're number 25. USC is nowhere to be found. Guys, isn't this ridiculous? I mean, shouldn't USC be ranked ahead of some of these teams? Come on, Mark Hogan, give it to me.
So, Chris, I looked at this, and literally, if I was out of the Charmin, I knew I had some backup to use. So you skipped right over number 12. And to me, this is the most interesting one, because if I didn't tell you the team, you would think I was describing USC. Mark Schlabach literally said this. LSU coach Brian Kelly hopes to restore LSU's reputation on defense this season, as the Tigers will get tested early against USC in the Vegas Kickoff Classic. The Trojans won't have Heisman Trophy winning quarterback Caleb Williams, Marshawn Lloyd, Brendan Rice, or Taj Washington, who helped them rank 3rd in FBS in scoring, yada, yada, yada. However, Lincoln Riley's offense will always be capable of piling up yards and points, but naturally USC has its own problems on defense. So why is USC's problems on defense going to be slowing down LSU on offense, who doesn't return their Heisman winning quarterback or any of their other, they replaced their entire defensive staff as well. This is what makes the ESPN poll crap worthy. Nothing worth. It is worse than worse. It's worth nothing.
Mark Hogan says it's worth nothing. Eric McKinney, do you want to defend this poll? You a big believer in these programs?
Look, I'm gonna speak for you. Oregon should obviously be 1, and then from there we'll put the rest together. So I'm glad that you rattled off the Kansas State, Louisville, Kansas, Kentucky there at the bottom range of that top 25. I don't need USC to be 7. I don't need them to be 12. I don't need them to be 15. 20, 21 in the mix. Yes, in that group. Look, if USC last year played the Holiday Bowl against Louisville 10 times, USC would win 12 times. Like that, comparing those 2 programs right now, especially after that, flip them out, put USC in there. Look, ultimately, this doesn't matter, and none of the early rankings matter. And with the 12-team playoff, none of the rankings for a long time this season are going to matter. So it's a lot of kind of chatter and all of that for the offseason. But that being said, USC belongs 18 to 21, 18 to 22, stick them in there somewhere as part of this. I think it does kind of show you what should be respect for the USC schedule going through. Mark mentioned LSU at what'd you say, 12, and then Michigan is right behind them. So USC's got 4 of the top 13 programs on their schedule, with Notre Dame, and then Penn State is up there too. But this just everything this offseason that doesn't include USC here is an absolute reflection on, look, Lincoln Riley, we bought in the last couple years. Oh yeah, he'll figure out defense. The buy-in is not there anymore. They're going to have to prove it. USC is going to have to prove it, because people nationally are not going to give him the benefit of the doubt anymore of, okay, yeah, we believe that he's going to figure out that defensive side. It's from this. And I do think when the actual polls come out, USC will be in the top 25 as we get closer to the season. But this is kind of that statement of we don't totally trust you to figure out the defensive side of the ball.
Look, and that's fair enough. Other than the fact that, I mean, Texas A&M, Miami, Kentucky, Louisville, what are you talking about? I mean, and it's not like USC had to have fireworks from Caleb Williams to beat Louisville in that game. They didn't. They didn't have Caleb there. They went out and smacked them, and it wasn't that hard. Mario Cristobal, his team is ranked. He has a losing record at Miami. Can Mario Cristobal coach football? I mean, I know he can. I know he's an effective offensive line coach. I know that he can recruit, at least when you have somebody giving huge bags of money to offer. But I don't see any evidence he can do anything. Texas A&M is a disaster, grease fire of a program every single year. So look, it's ridiculous that they don't have USC in the top 25. It's not ridiculous that USC has to prove it to people this year because USC not only had disastrous performances on defense the last 2 years, but the offense did take a step back, despite the fact that they had pretty decent rankings overall. You look at the last half of the year and you look at an offense that struggled in surprising ways. But look, I've got news for you. This USC team is going to be pretty good. I don't know if they're going to be good enough to manage this schedule, but they're going to have a pretty good roster. It's going to be a better roster by the time you get to September. And with a new defensive staff that is as good as this defensive staff is, don't be surprised if USC plays some decent defense this year. I suspect they will. So yeah, I mean, this is silliness. Kentucky.
It's the rationale that was used for some of this. It was just
I don't know. Kansas, you're telling me on a neutral field, people think Kansas is going to beat USC? Nobody thinks that. Kansas doesn't think that. It's ridiculous.
Mario Cristobal has not met a quarterback yet in his career that he has not ruined. Cam Ward, good luck.
Yeah, that's all fair. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, LSU at 12, and to me, it looks like USC and LSU are mirror image programs at this point. So I don't get it, but I guess it doesn't matter. Except it matters for this reason. If you start in the top 15 and you lose 3 games, you're still going to be number 20. If you start outside the top 25 and you lose 3 games, your others receiving votes, and that does matter. But I guess the answer to that is to not lose 3 games. Okay, fellas, any other ESPN hate we want to spew? We at least got people interested again because now we have USC fans furiously writing comments about how ESPN is biased, and we have the few fans from Oklahoma who still bother to show up at our program talking about how Lincoln Riley's terrible. So I at least know that's coming out. All right, that's it. We're done. All right, Arledge, just 10 questions. Are we ready, guys? And Mark,
I mean, we never are.
I mean, nobody's ever ready for this, but I think that, look, I'm going to be honest. It's my intention to be fair and even-handed this week in judging this, okay? I don't always do that, but that's my goal this week. I want to be fair and even-handed. I think we have some good questions, even some that have to do with USC football. And let's start with one of those. Question number 1. Mark Holken, you're going to answer first. Who is the opening day starter at right tackle for the USC Trojans?
Well, I'm not sure he's on the roster right now, but if I have to choose somebody on the roster, it'll be.
You don't. You can choose whoever you want.
All right. He's in the transfer portal right now.
Okay. Does he have a name?
I'm not going to say a name yet.
Okay. Well, you have to because that's a question. The question.
All right, well, then I'm picking Mason Murphy.
Okay, Mason Murphy. It is. Eric McKinney. Is it Mason Murphy?
Well, since I go second, can I take the field? I choose the field.
Is that a name of a person?
So on the roster, yeah, it's Mason Murphy. I'm going to say, again, this is just kind of a shot. It's not going to be him. And I also am looking transfer. I don't know if whoever it ends up being is in the transfer portal right now. I think it's potentially a spring jump in, but I'll throw out just a couple names. Chad Lindbergh from Georgia went in the portal earlier this month in early March. He took an official to USC back in 2020, so he's got some familiarity. Played a little bit at Georgia. And then kind of an interesting one is Chase Basantis at Texas A&M. He went in the portal back in December. A bunch of schools reached out, USC being one of them. Then he went back to A&M. The idea that anything is finalized, though, in this day and age is a little bit crazy. You can jump in and out of the portal whenever you want. So I think those are two with like some kind of USC connection that would make sense as being potential additions. But I'd assume when this spring portal opens that it'll be kind of somebody off the radar right now that jumps in and USC jumps on.
Yeah, in retrospect, I think this is an unfair question because I think we all agree it's probably not going to be anybody on the roster. And so I'm going to do what they do. You know what you're supposed to do if you give a test and you realize later that test question probably wasn't it was worded poorly, or for whatever reason people struggled with it, and you just throw it out. I'm just throwing it out. Nobody gets a point for this at all. But you're right. It's going to be somebody from the transfer portal. And by the way, the spring transfer portal, I think, could have some fireworks, both offensive tackle, defensive line, and maybe linebacker especially. Okay, so the new question 1, which is actually question 2. Where does Juju Watkins currently rank in the all-time USC women's basketball list? Eric McKinney, where is she?
So this is before the game against UConn. I have her at 5, but a very close 5. So I've got her behind Cheryl Miller, Lisa Leslie, Cynthia Cooper, Tina Thompson, Juju. If she beats UConn, I think she's 3 behind Miller and Lisa Leslie already, with an honestly, a clear shot at becoming 1 by the time she's done at USC.
I guess it depends how long she stays at USC, right? I mean, taking Cheryl Miller off the number 1 spot, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine, Eric.
I think maybe women's basketball is tougher to win national championships right now. With the class coming in next year, plus what you assume will be a couple bigs that want to play with her that come over in the portal. Again, I know that's ifs. She's got a chance at multiple, maybe 3 Final Fours, a couple championships. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
All right, Mark Holcomb, what do you think? Where is she?
Yeah. Look, it doesn't matter who is number 3, 4, or 5. She is still behind Cheryl Miller and Lisa Leslie. And look, Juju can take this squad to the next 3 or 4 Final Fours. That's great. But until you win back-to-back national championships, Juju is going to be great. She's going to go down in the annals of history at USC as one of the best to ever play. But look, the best she's ever going to get is number 2, unless she can surpass what Cheryl Miller did.
Mark is right. She'll never get to number 1. The best she can do is it's just as likely that she will unseat Cheryl Miller at number 1 as it is that she'll unseat Michael Jordan as the best men's basketball player of all time. It's not going to happen. Mark Holkin's right. It's 1-0 Holkin. All right. What's the one call, offense or defense, that you never want to see again from USC? Mark Holkin, what is it?
Is it one call or the person making the call?
No. It's not the person making the call. It's the call. It could be a play call, a defense, whatever. It's a call the coaches make on game day. What do you never want to see again?
Going for it on 4th and 20.
Going for it on 4th and 20, no matter what? Like even if we're down 8 with a minute and a half left? Okay. I don't think that's true. I think we have to go for it on 4th and 20 in certain situations.
I want to tell you what I really want to say, but I can't. It would be an individual play, and we're never going to see that happen again, because when you have the best player on your team.
Oh, you're talking about that. You're going to bring us back to the Rose Bowl? Don't bring us back to the Rose Bowl. I can't deal with that right now. Eric McKinney,
I'm willing to give Eric this point. Just give him the point.
I'm going to give it to, but he may get a point taken away. You never know. Go ahead, Eric.
Go for it on 4th and 19. The answer is, right, you have a safety 15 yards off a slot receiver with outside leverage, and he allows the defense allows the receiver untouched off the line to run a post and that safety has no help across the field and the receiver runs wide open into the end zone for a touchdown, which I think we saw multiple times within the last couple years. So that'd be a good start to a race. Look, I thought Mark was going to slam dunk and go rush end on a wheel route 35 yards downfield. So I had a couple planned, and I went for the one that I know Chris loves. But I think both those on the same play would be the absolute
I
avoid.
think Eric circumvented the answer because he literally just described Alex Grinch, and I was ready to go there.
But you already conceded the point, so I don't know why you're arguing. It's 1-1. And the answer, by the way, is cover 0 and rushing 4. I never again want to see cover 0 rushing 4. I don't understand why you do it. I don't understand why you do it multiple times a game, and I don't understand why you keep doing it when you keep giving up touchdowns. But whoever the defensive coordinator is at Wisconsin, when Alex Grinch proposes that in your team meeting, just say no. It doesn't work. Okay, it's 1-1. Question number 4. The classic rock act you still need to see before they retire or die. McKinney?
So I know they don't do a lot together, but if I asked nicely, I think I could get Jimmy Page and Robert Plant and John Paul Jones together for like a solo concert where I could just watch them play. So that's going to be it for me. The surviving members of Led Zeppelin getting together.
Okay, Led Zeppelin in Eric McKinney's garage. Interesting answer. Mark Culkin, what's yours?
If there is a way to get AC/DC back on the stage, I'll be there. I've seen a lot of bands. I've yet to see AC/DC.
By the way, I think AC/DC still does tour, don't they? I know that temporarily the lead singer disappeared. They brought in Axl Rose. He was sitting there in a wheelchair.
What's his name? Angus, I think was going deaf, and I think
No, not Angus. Angus is the guitar player that looks like dressed like a schoolboy. But yeah, I think he's back. So I think you're going to get your chance. Mark is going to get the point because he at least proposed something that could conceivably happen. AC/DC in concert. Eric McKinney has Led Zeppelin showing up at his house for some reason. Okay, whatever. Number 5. All right, we're going to a strange question, but that's what you want from me. We're going to end the NCAA's tyranny over major college football, break away, form a new governing body, and you can bring back one dead U.S. president to be the new commissioner of this college football organization. Who do you choose? Mark Hogan.
That's easy. That's Ronald Reagan. Tear down this wall.
He's bringing back the Gipper. All right, he's bringing back the Gipper. What about you, McKinney?
So I've got 5 names written down. I'm not going to give you all 5. Look, what I would love, honestly, and again, this is a temporary situation. I'd like to bring back William Henry Harrison just because people would convince him, do not go shirtless to the Penn State whiteout in the middle of the winter. And he would die a month later, and then we'd have to find a new NCAA president. For me, look, Gerald Ford got some consideration just because of the football background. I think he would be too slanted to Michigan, and that's an issue for me. James K. Polk I threw out immediately because of the addition of Oregon, and I knew that would upset you if I had talked about him at all. So I'm gonna go easy, and the first kind of name that popped into my mind, I'm going to bring back Abraham Lincoln. I think we've got a real North-South Big Ten SEC issue going on, and with USC aligning itself with that Big Ten, I want some strength there.
All right. I think solid answers for both. The real answer is Teddy Roosevelt, by the way, because Roosevelt saved football once upon a time and could do so again. I'm not necessarily a fan of Roosevelt's politics for a lot of reasons, but Roosevelt may have been the coolest dude ever to hold the office, right? I mean, with his war exploits, with his efforts to go marching into unknown lands and discover things, the fact that the guy got shot and finished his speech before he sought medical attention, TR is the guy we need. So nobody's going to get a point except me. We're going to move on. All right. All-time best movie quote. It's open for everything. Just give me the all-time best movie quote. Eric McKinney.
I mean, this one's hard because anyone you're picking, you're saying something else isn't the best all time. And I think there's
That's
a
the
bunch.
whole,
So
by definition, right? Go.
exactly. So again, look, I wrote down 4. Mine, Nigel Tufnell, these go to 11. That for me is always going to get a laugh. I think you can use it in a lot of different situations. And so again, trying to narrow down just one is just an impossible task. And I'm going to go with that one. Although after Mark's answer, I'm gonna use another one. I think that might be fitting too.
You know what, though? I appreciate your self-restraint here, Eric, because
I
usually
didn't. I only said one.
I know, I love it. Culkin, what is it? Best quote of all time.
Man, I wanted to pick so many different lines from The Breakfast Club, but because there was too many and I didn't want to discount any of the other ones, I'm just going to go Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. Everybody recognizes that. And when the room is silent, it's a great way to get people's attention.
That's true. All right, McKinney, what was the other comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, the finish right is Mr. Culkin. What you've just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I've ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Evan's oven timer went off just in time to get that out.
Yeah, no, obviously a fantastic quote. The problem with that quote is it's just too lengthy, right? So here's what we're going to do. I actually liked both of your answers, and I do find that they're both useful. But Culkin's quote, Bueller can only be used in one particular situation where everybody's quiet, and it's used frequently, and it's fantastic. But I think McKinney's right. I think you can say this one goes to 11 in all kinds of circumstances, and I use it myself quite frequently, and I think that's the right answer. And I can tell Mark doesn't like that ruling, but that's the ruling it is.
I can come up with different situations to come in. But
It's
okay.
true too. Look, there are no wrong answers. I mean, there might be some wrong answers in
I
this,
don't argue it.
but today there weren't. All right, that's 2-2. USC player who became an NFL success that you never expected would succeed in the league. Mark is looking like it's the first time he's looked at these questions.
I guarantee it.
Jeez. Okay, then McKinney, why don't you go? We'll let Mark think about it for a minute.
The answer for me is Everson Griffin, based on what he did and maybe what you expected out of USC. Like, he's a big time recruit and he played well at USC, but you never got the sense that he was like as dialed in as you would need to be to have the success that he had in the NFL. I mean, 170 games, 85.5 sacks, 4-time Pro Bowler, and a guy who like announced he was leaving USC with time still on the clock at the bowl game, basically. Like he was out when it was done. A close second, and this one, you know what? I'm not even gonna run into it. I'm gonna leave that one. That's my answer.
Okay, Everson Griffin. Mark Culkin, what do you think?
I don't know how much he played at USC, but he had a pretty good NFL career at quarterback, Matt Castle. I mean, he came in at USC as a tight end, didn't play either position at USC. I mean, he held the clipboard at quarterback, but that was pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, he had one really great regular season, hung around a long time, made a lot of money. Yeah, I suppose it depends what you're looking for. I think both are very good answers. Everson Griffin, to me, that's the name that I thought of too. And I'll tell you, Everson Griffin will always be the guy that's sort of the face of the erosion of Pete Carroll's program. Now, Carroll had one bad season. I suspect he would have bounced back quite nicely after that. I don't believe that his program was done. But this was, I mean, Everson Griffin was a huge recruitant for a reason, right? That guy had rare physical skills that you just don't find anywhere. And never came close to playing up to what you expected of him. It would almost be like if, obviously he produced more than Corey Foreman, but if Corey Foreman made an NFL roster and played for 10 years, you'd say, wait a minute, how did that happen? Everson Griffin almost gives me the same vibe, even though he was a far better college player than Corey, but just wasn't what you thought he would be. And then he goes to the NFL and he becomes exactly what you thought he would be. Both good answers. I'm going to give you both a point. We're going to go 3-3. Here's one that you guys probably have so many answers that you don't know which ones to give us, but what's your worst prediction or piece of commentary you've ever made in writing or video for WeAreSC? Mark, what's the dumbest thing you've ever said in an article or a video for WeAreSC?
I have to pick one.
You have to pick one. I know it's hard. I can think of 30 or 40 for you off the top of my head. So what is it?
It's the first one at the top of your head. I don't know. USC. Geez. I'm sure I wrote about it. I just don't know which article. USC was going to go undefeated last year. Obviously, that did not come to fruition.
You know what I love about this question is that everybody watching this video is going to have their own ideas about the dumbest things that all three of us have said. And so we're going to be exposed to all kinds of quotes that we didn't even remember. And I love it. Okay, so Culkin predicting USC to be undefeated this past year. He was barely off, but he was off. McKinney, what's the dumbest thing you've ever shared with the people?
Well, when I took over full time here, I told someone Chris probably has a week left, and then we'll have to figure something else out. No, the answer that always comes up for me in terms of like a guy that I thought coming into USC was a absolute guaranteed, maybe not a star, but a guaranteed contributor and a solid piece was Connor Murphy coming in from Arizona, a guy that a bunch of big time programs wanted. His older brother was a star at Stanford. And just every year it was like, is he going to get it together? Is he going to contribute? Is he going to do anything? And it just never happened. Again, there's probably a ton of guys that I thought, but I really vividly remember thinking, well, this is a guaranteed starter, multiple year starter at USC, and that never happened again. I'm sure there's dumber stuff I've said, but nothing really sticks in my head like that one.
Yeah, I'm sure there's dumber stuff you said too. I don't even remember that one, but
earlier in this show, I guarantee.
Yeah, no. Look, I'm not going to take cheap shots at either one of you. I could do that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let everybody else do it for me, and that's going to be fun. For myself, it was long before I was writing for WeAreSC, but easily the dumbest thing I've ever said about USC football is the fax I sent in to Heritage Hall when Pete Carroll was hired, complaining that it was the dumbest hire that USC had ever made. That one did not age well. Fortunately, I don't have that in writing except whatever file they keep all those comments in. If you're an intern at Heritage Hall, go pull that out and send it to me. I'll put it up on the board. Okay.
Just so you know, Chris, I actually saw boxes of files under the track stadium from years and years. I mean, this stuff had dust and cobwebs. They don't throw anything away.
It's out there somewhere. If somebody can find that fax, I'd love to see it. All right. Nobody gets a point. You guys have both said dumber things than that. It's 3-3. Number 9, fastest player in pads you've ever seen at USC. I mean, I think we know based on track times who the fastest guys ever. You had a couple of guys on this in the late 60s that were on world record relay team. Sultan McCullough ran 10.17 his first year at USC, which is moving. But that's different than the fastest guy in pads a lot of times. Who's the fastest guy in pads you've ever seen? Who wants to start us off? Eric, start us off.
So Sultan McCullough was my answer. I remember he was there when I first got to USC, and seeing him was eye-opening. So the easy answer is Reggie Bush, and I know that's like off the top, very easy. But Sultan McCullough for me was unbelievable. The interesting thing is I think two of the faster guys, Ronald Jones and Adoree Jackson, both ran like they were walking. Like it was so easy. They never looked fast. It was very smooth for them. And those are probably two of the 10 fastest guys that played at USC in the last 20 years. But no, you went with the guy that I had thought, which was Sultan.
Sultan McCauley says, what about you, Mark? Fastest guy in pads ever at USC that you've watched.
It's Sultan, and since Eric took him, I got to go the next guy. And we've mentioned his name so many times on the show, but RJ Soward, you give him the ball, he was a flash. I mean, UCLA is still trying to find out where he ran by. I mean, was quick.
Yeah, those are both really good answers. I think that, and Sultan McCullough was in some sense a track guy playing football, but he was a good football player, right? He put up good numbers and played well. RJ Soward should have been a first-team All-American. That really he should have. But his life went haywire. But we've had a bunch of guys. George Farmer was about as fast a football player as you're going to see, but he was not as good as at least 2 or maybe 3 of the other receivers on his own team. So sometimes straight line speed is and speed in pads is not the same thing. You both had the same answer. You both think it's Sultan McCullough. I think that's probably true, and he's probably the fastest guy out of pads that has played at USC since I've been watching. You both get a point. It's 4-4 going into the final and deciding question. Very exciting. 4-4. One question left. And here it is. Everybody knows how great the Lane Kiffin coaching tree is. On September 21st, we're going to get to see it live on our television screens. Master versus pupil. Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss squad takes on the assistant he brought to USC. Thank you, Lane. Clay Helton and the Georgia Southern Eagles. Give me your prediction for this exciting matchup. Guys, I know it's a long way away. There's still some transfer portal stuff that could happen, but it's hard not to talk about Lane Kiffin versus Clay Helton. What do you think is going to happen? Mark Holkin, start us off.
Yeah, I think Jackson Dart is just gonna make Clay regret ever recruiting him to USC at one time. Look, if this game was being played in Georgia Southern's stadium, maybe they had a chance, but I think Lane's he's gonna go Nick Saban on him.
You don't trust Clay Helton on the road against a team with superior talent? I don't understand that. Eric McKinney, what do we make of this matchup?
Yeah, so Ole Miss wins by 40. There are combined 0 rushing attempts from both teams, and then we hear about how many Warriors suited up on both sides of the ball.
Any deflated footballs, or do you think that Lane's not going to have to resort to that in this one?
I think that they'll be okay without him, which means he'll still do it anyway. Yes.
Okay. Over under. We'll close it out this way. Over under on the number of times we see this face from Clay Helton. Over under. What's it going to be?
I think 3. They'll show it early, but then they'll stop. Then they'll stop showing it.
He's not going to stop doing it. We're just going to stop seeing it.
That you asked how many times we'd see it, not how many times he'd do it.
That's fair. Mark, what do you think? What's the over under on that?
1.5.
1.5. The answer is 12.
Easy for everybody.
The answer is 12. Eric McKinney was closest. He wins 5-4. Good game this week, guys. It was competitive. We talked about basketball, including women's basketball, so we went a little off script. I hope people enjoyed that. If they didn't enjoy it, don't worry about it. We probably won't talk about basketball here for at least 12 or 13 more years. Anything we should share before we leave? And be careful, because last week Mark went ahead and said something, and it actually cost him his game. So I don't want you to you lost a point after the game was over. So don't say anything dumb, but if you have something you want to share, let's share it. Nothing.
No, we're good.
Too scared. Everybody's too scared to talk. All right, fine. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you again next week. Maybe something exciting will happen in recruiting. These days at USC, that's a real possibility. So until then, fight on, everybody.